For years, the bond between Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson has survived rumors, scandals, and relentless public scrutiny, yet nothing compares to the tension now simmering inside the walls of Royal Lodge. After a recent humiliation, Andrew is said by those close to the situation to have made a demand that stunned Sarah and pushed her to an emotional breaking point. What was once a private dispute has become a dramatic clash filled with anger, confusion, and disbelief among those watching from the sidelines. According to people familiar with the situation, Andrew has asked Sarah to keep her distance from him, a request that reportedly left her furious and deeply hurt. She has been described as lonely in the sprawling estate, spending long hours by herself and retreating to the quieter corners of the house. Some staff have claimed she occasionally asks them to stay longer simply because the silence feels unbearable. Reports portray the two as sharing the same massive home yet barely crossing paths except at meals. Their routines have drifted so far apart that they now occupy opposite ends of the property, interacting only when necessary. Even then, those rare encounters shift between strained silence and heavy, emotional discussions about their uncertain futures. The atmosphere, insiders say, has become tense and unpredictable. People close to Sarah describe her as increasingly anxious about what lies ahead. With Andrew's future unsettled and their living situation deteriorating, her fear and confusion have reportedly intensified. She worries about being pulled into Andrew's troubles and is deeply concerned about how all of this might affect their daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. For years, the public viewed Andrew and Sarah as an unusually close pair, divorced yet devoted, companions who somehow made their unconventional arrangement work. But now their long-standing bond appears to be under severe strain. Royal Lodge, once a symbol of their comfortable, if unconventional partnership, has become a place of emotional distance and growing isolation. As Andrew prepares for a possible move and Sarah navigates her own fears, uncertainty hangs heavily over the estate. At one end of the house, Andrew retreats to a dim study surrounded by packing boxes, the curtains drawn tight as if sealing him away from the outside world. At the other end, Sarah walks the halls in quiet distress, struggling with the emptiness that has settled into the rooms they once shared in relative harmony. Despite their divorce, it managed for nearly 2 decades to present a united front, sharing holidays, attending events together, projecting an image of a modern, amicable family. Beneath that image, however, were long-standing vulnerabilities, Sarah's financial troubles and Andrew's reliance on her as a buffer during difficult public moments. Now, with pressures mounting and the future uncertain, the facade has begun to crack. Their once solid arrangement appears to be unraveling as both find themselves isolated in different ways. Trying to navigate the shifting ground beneath them, they had always shared one unspoken pact. The mysterious force that bound them far longer than their marriage ever had, the secrets. They were the real glue dates, places, faces, whispered favors. Quiet negotiations in hotel suites from the Gulf to countries the palace would rather forget existed. They were the kind of secrets that could shatter reputations if spoken aloud, heavy enough to sink careers and anything tethered to them. Over the years, that pact became a shield they both relied on. Protect me, and I will protect you. Keep my secrets, and I'll keep yours. As long as they stayed silent, they stayed standing. But now, even that fragile alliance seems broken. According to those whispering through the corridors of Royal Lodge, Prince Andrew has issued the coldest order he ever directed at Sarah. She is no longer to be near him. Staff murmured that when they happen to pass in the same hallway, the atmosphere drops to freezing. They eat in separate wings. They exchange barely 2 words, sharp and icy, like blades slipped into conversation. The distance between them has become a chasm. For Sarah, once sat confidently before cameras saying she would always stand by him, the sudden dismissal cuts deep. No acknowledgement, no gentle parting, not even a final conversation, just a blunt ending. Friends say she swings between anger that leaves her trembling and long, quiet nights where her grief spills over in waves. Sometimes she drifts into the private bar, where Andrew once entertained guests. It is the same room that years ago held people who would later become infamous. Now she sits there alone with a glass of gin, while Andrew isolates himself at the opposite end of the house. The hallways stretch between them like a battlefield after the smoke has lifted, silent, ruined. Echoing with what neither dares to speak, their estrangement invites an inevitable question. How did everything unravel so completely? To understand the fracture, people close to them point back to a summer evening long ago. In July 2006, Royal Lodge shimmered with the glow of a warm sunset and the scent of roses drifting across the lawns. Andrew, ever the gracious host, moved through a small pre-party gathering for his daughter's upcoming masquerade ball, smiling, offering drinks, doing what he always believed he did best, being the charming royal in command of his world. Champagne glasses caught the light. Laughter floated across the garden. Nothing looked out of place, yet beneath the elegance lay shadows guests pretended not to see. Among the attendees were several figures who, in the years ahead, would become synonymous with scandal. The gathering was not random. These were personal invitations to a secluded corner of royal life. The garden paths, the private lounge tucked away behind hedges, the bar where conversations were shared out of sight, these were spaces rarely witnessed by outsiders. For years, rumors circulated quietly. Then, much later, old photographs surfaced, reopening questions and doubts. Faces and scenes captured in those images began to take on darker meanings in hindsight. The once magical gardens now seemed to carry a lingering heaviness, as though the air itself remembers too much. By late 2025, pressure mounted around Andrew until it became impossible to ignore. After lengthy deliberations and private arguments, the king made a final decision. Remaining titles were revoked, privileges dissolved, and finally, the lease to Royal Lodge, his long-held refuge, was terminated. Too many, it felt like more than a consequence. It felt like the monarchy was opening a long-locked vault, releasing years of hidden shame, long-buried regrets, and the shadows of powerful men who once found cover in proximity to a prince. The echoes of those choices still linger, stretching through the corridors of Royal Lodge, where two people now stand far apart, bound only by memories neither of them can outrun. Royal Lodge lost its prince that day, but more importantly, it lost the final barrier between private royal life and the scrutiny that had long been gathering outside. Once that barrier was gone, long-buried stories began resurfacing, stories from a summer evening in 2006 when the gardens glowed. Champagne flowed, and a group of guests walked through a royal estate with an ease that, in hindsight, feels unsettling. Among the visitors were people whose names would later be tied to some of the most notorious scandals of the modern era. Their presence at such an event seemed odd even then. But it was only years later that the true weight of those associations became clear. One of them, Jeffrey Epstein, would eventually drag Prince Andrew into a storm that reshaped his public life. By March 2011, the BBC was reporting that Andrew's long friendship with Epstein, who had by then been convicted as a sex offender, was provoking rising public outrage. Critics questioned why a senior royal would maintain ties with a man already at the center of criminal investigations, and many called for Andrew to step down from his role as the UK's special trade envoy. The situation worsened when Sarah Ferguson disclosed that Epstein had helped pay £15,000 of her personal debts, a revelation that cast Andrew's connection to him in an even more troubling light. The scandal intensified further when, in late 2010, Andrew was photographed walking with Epstein in New York shortly after Epstein had completed his prison sentence. The image spread quickly and stunned the public. Many wondered why a member of the royal family would meet so publicly with someone carrying such a criminal record. By July 2011, the pressure could no longer be ignored. Andrew stepped down from his envoy role and was said to have severed ties with Epstein. Yet the controversy continued to build. At the end of December 2014, court filings in Florida included allegations from Virginia Giuffre, then Virginia Roberts, who said she had been trafficked by Epstein as a minor and claimed she had been coerced into sexual encounters with Andrew in 3 locations, including London when she was 17. She also claimed she had been paid for one of those encounters. Flight logs confirmed that she and Andrew had been in the places she described. A widely circulated photograph, showing Andrew with his arm around her waist and Ghislaine Maxwell in the background, quickly became central to public debate. Andrew's supporters questioned the authenticity of the photo, while Giuffre maintained her story. After years of legal proceedings and intense media scrutiny, Andrew and Giuffre reached a private settlement in 2022 with no admission of wrongdoing. The agreement ended the civil lawsuit but did little to quiet public speculation. More details continued to surface. In unsealed 2019 court documents from a separate defamation case, another woman, Johanna Schoberg, alleged inappropriate behavior by Andrew inside Epstein's mansion. That same month, an email exchange released by the New Republic described a 2010 encounter in Epstein's New York residence, in which a man identified as Andy, later understood by the sender to be Prince Andrew, received a foot massage from two young women. The accumulation of reports and testimony built relentless pressure around the prince. Eventually, it reached the point where the monarchy itself was forced to act. On October 30th, in a move described as unprecedented, King Charles withdrew Andrew's remaining royal titles and privileges. He was also instructed to vacate Royal Lodge, the 30-room residence he had lived in since 2003. The announcement, issued formally by Buckingham Palace, sent shockwaves through royal observers and underscored how swiftly and severely circumstances can shift within the institution. The fallout continued to escalate. 2 weeks before the decisive announcement that removed Andrew from Royal Lodge, another shock had already hit the public on October 17th. He had agreed to relinquish his long-held title of Duke of York. The move immediately raised questions about Sarah Ferguson as well. Though divorced since 1996, she had retained the courtesy title of Duchess of York for decades. But as Andrew's status shifted, so did hers. And it became clear that she too would be surrendering the style that had defined her public identity. Within days, the royal hierarchy had been rearranged. Andrew would now be known simply as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, a name stripped of grandeur and ritual. Veteran royal commentator Robert Hardman, speaking on Palace Confidential, remarked that the consequences extended beyond ceremony. Public appearances could soon require Andrew to show deference to his own daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, who now outranked him. He suggested the prince would comply reluctantly, hinting at the tension such moments would inevitably create. But the concern within the royal family was not solely about Andrew. As Hardman emphasized, the king and senior royals had long worried about ensuring that Beatrice and Eugenie remained protected from the consequences of their father's scandal. They were, he noted, blameless, level-headed women who had conducted themselves with grace. Despite years of unwanted attention, Andrew's fall from privilege became more than a personal reckoning. It signaled a wider reordering of status, influence, and responsibility. As he stepped back into relative obscurity, Beatrice and Eugenie stepped forward, their roles expanding in a monarchy trying to modernize without unraveling the public. Meanwhile, watched for signs of how Andrew would adapt to his new reality, how his daughters would navigate their elevated visibility, and whether the fractures within the family could ever fully mend. It felt like another chapter in a story that had captured public fascination for years, part personal tragedy, part institutional drama. Amid all of this, some wondered why Sarah Ferguson was affected at all. After all, she and Andrew had been divorced for decades. Why had the consequences of his downfall extended into her life? The answer lay in the peculiar and often misunderstood nature of their post-divorce relationship. After their separation, Sarah remained a favorite subject of the tabloids. Every misstep, every financial struggle, every public appearance found its way into headlines. In 1995, her name was dragged into an unusual scandal when a New York airport worker pleaded guilty to stealing a diamond necklace and bracelet worth nearly $400,000 from her luggage. It became yet another strange episode in a life already lived under intense scrutiny. Despite their divorce, she and Andrew continued to share their marital home, Sunning Hill Park, for almost 10 years. In 2004, he moved to Royal Lodge, the former residence of the Queen Mother, and Sarah kept her own place nearby. When a small fire forced her out of her rented home in 2008, she temporarily returned to Royal Lodge, restarting the odd but enduring arrangement that had long puzzled the public. Her life increasingly unfolded across borders. By 2015, she had moved to Switzerland. Residing in the luxurious chalet she co-owned with Andrew, and she later applied for Swiss residency. She maintained ties in London, renting an apartment in Eaton Square and buying and selling properties as part of her financial recovery. In 2025, she sold a Belgravia townhouse purchased several years earlier for her daughter's, another reminder of how deeply intertwined her identity remained with her family. Alongside her property ventures, she endured invasions of privacy that came with fame. She was one of the many victims of the News International phone hacking scandal, eventually receiving a settlement. Her name later appeared in the Panama Papers, a revelation that brought renewed media attention. Through it all, Sarah Ferguson managed to adapt, reinvent, and persist. Her life, shaped by privilege and controversy in equal measure, has been far more complex than tabloid headlines suggest. The consequences of Andrew's downfall reached her not because they were still a couple, but because their lives financially, domestically, and emotionally remained unusually, perhaps unavoidably intertwined. It becomes, in the end, the portrait of a woman continually navigating the uneasy crossroads between independence, public expectation, and the need to reinvent herself. Every decision, where she lives, what she buys, how she manages her finances, invites scrutiny from a world that refuses to look away. From stolen jewels in New York to quiet winters in Switzerland, Sarah Ferguson's story continues to fascinate, a testament to the complicated blend of privilege and pressure that comes with living on the blurred line between royalty and celebrity. Against this backdrop, questions swirl about Andrew and Sarah's recent actions. Their choices have grown more curious, their movements more ambiguous. Some wonder whether they are drifting apart for good, or whether there is a deeper strategy behind the facade of distance. Rumors whispered that both are seeking new forms of companionship beyond the walls of Royal Lodge. Andrew, now living on the fringes of royal life, is said to be tentatively exploring the world of discreet, invitation-only dating apps. The criteria are specific: middle-aged, private, comfortable around dogs, and above all, discreet. Sarah, meanwhile, has told confidants she wants someone unafraid to be seen with her, someone who will not shrink from her complicated past. Their parallel searches seem less like romance and more like preparation, a soft landing before the final unraveling of the world they shared. For when Royal Lodge empties for the last time, when Andrew moves to a modest cottage far from Windsor, and Sarah settles wherever life takes her next, there will be no familiar roof to shelter their fragile alliance. The shared secrets, the mutual protection, the strange companionship they maintained for decades will dissolve into separate fates. And when the final moving van disappears down the drive in early 2026, silence may no longer be enough to contain everything they once concealed. Perhaps Sarah will finally write the memoir she has threatened for years, the one that begins with a line meant to stop the reader's breath. Or perhaps Andrew, frustrated and isolated, will decide that the only power left to him lies in telling his side of the story. Or maybe the truth will seep out slowly, an old document resurfacing, a stray photograph, a quiet tip sent anonymously, threads that, once tugged, unravel the careful tapestry of their lives. Royal Lodge itself is being emptied room by room, stripped of the memories and ghosts that linger in its corridors. Soon it will stand silent, waiting for its next occupant, someone blissfully unaware of the shadows it once held. And somewhere in the world, two former royals search for connection, hoping that new loyalty might keep old stories safely buried. But secrets have long memories, and houses are patient witnesses. The garden remembers, the walls remember, and eventually, the world remembers too. What was once hidden behind courtesy titles and royal privilege may prove impossible to restrain forever. When the final chapter begins, the truth rarely trickles. It arrives like a storm,